I hate to say this, but there was a bit more stress over the past week at the Erickson household than usual, and it was partially because of StarLink. You can just kind of see the router over there. But the good news is this has a happy ending to the story, but essentially after just a few days of using it, me and my wife very quickly realized we can work with this, okay? The speeds aren't as great as Comcast, but it is substantially cheaper, and I also have the vote with your wallet mentality of wanting to support businesses that I believe in and want to not support businesses I don't believe in, and this could not be any more drastic. I despise Comcast. I hate so much of what they do. I despise so much of their business models and how they treat their customers and how much of a monopoly they have. And they were getting more and more expensive by the month, and yet StarLink has very much cheaper than what Comcast was offering, especially if you factor in no data caps on StarLink, whereas Comcast was charging extra for unlimited data. And I 100% believe in SpaceX. I love them, and I want to see them succeed. I watch all their launches, of course, and if you watch Talos of Space, you know I'm a pretty big SpaceX fanboy, understandably. So, of course, I wanted to support SpaceX, and we canceled Comcast, and that was a huge amount of stress, but it's such a long story that I'm going to save that for a tech video later, and it is still ongoing. That process hasn't officially ended yet. The long short of it is we want to cancel Comcast, but they are not letting us. Basically, we're not sending them any money, and we're just going to find out what happens. But anywho, to get to the process of letting StarLink be our one and only ISP, we had to essentially run the coax cable from the StarLink dish on the roof in through our front door. Thankfully, there was a bit of a gap underneath our front door, and get that wire through. And then it had to come through my office door. Huge wired mess down here. There still is kind of a mess, but going to the router so that we can actually plug in. And the concept I had in my mind was very simple. I was like, okay, we have a Comcast cable coming through our wall here. It connects to my modem and my router that was just beneath my desk. I had a very simple idea, right? We take out the Comcast coax cable and then we put in the StarLink coax cable, right? Sounds pretty simple. And in my head, that sounded like it was going to be the easiest thing in the world. So when my wife was like, hey, we have this big coax cable going through our front door and through the living room into your office. Are we going to clean this up? What's the long-term plan here? Why is the cable everywhere? And I told her it was a temporary measure. And, you know, whenever you're ready, whenever we're done with Comcast, we can just remove that wire from the hole in this wall and replace it with the StarLink coax cable, right? Seems very simple. Well, as it turns out, every tiny step of this process you can imagine ended up being about 10 times more difficult and more complicated than I thought. First stage of the process, let's just pull the old coax cable out, right? I thought that would be simple. Well, as it turns out, the coax cable that Comcast installed against this wall here has a little joint adapter on the front of it that ended up being thicker than the hole Comcast actually drilled in the first place, which meant that once I disconnected the coax cable from the modem, it was actually screwed on really, really tight. I had to get a pair of pliers to get it off, so that part ended up being more hard than I thought. I just thought I could pull the cable out, but as soon as I started pulling, it became clear very quickly that it was getting stuck on something. It would not come out no matter how hard I pulled. I even thought, you know what, I'm just gonna pull as hard as I can and make the hole get a little bit wider or break the cable. I'm not planning on using this cable anymore. It's Xfinity's old wire, it's not mine. So I was pulling and pulling and it would not come out. So essentially, we had to take off this little extra coax bracket and snip the other end off, and that was able to get the coax through the hole in the wall, but still took a little bit longer than I was anticipating. And then I thought it would be really easy to get the StarLink cable through the hole in the wall, but they have designed the coax that comes with StarLink a little bit clunky, in my opinion. I love SpaceX and I love StarLink, but I do have some criticisms of the product, something I hope they can improve in the future. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So over in this mess of wires I still have yet to organize, this is the wire that goes directly to the terminal outside. They make this very simple for dummies to understand. So the white cable with the white box goes to the router. This one goes outside, and this part isn't too bulky. It's okay, but on the other end, there's this big, nub. I'm not exactly sure what the term for this is or what its functional purpose is, but this extra brick was a lot thicker than the traditional coax cable, and this is about as thick as the hole in the wall was. So obviously, once I started feeding this end of the cable through the wall, this block prevented me from filling in very easily. So it became very clear pretty early on that, all right, I am going to have to widen the hole in the wall in order to get the StarLink cable through it, which I thought was going to end up being pretty simple. So I do have a powered drill, nothing terribly fancy. It was a gift. I didn't even buy it myself, but it has come in handy lots of times in the past when we needed to drill stuff or undrill stuff. In fact, I used this same drill to mount the StarLink dish to the roof so it doesn't fall off. Actually, yesterday it was extremely windy and the connection was still fine, and today it's actually been raining quite a bit and the signal is still good. I was actually live streaming as it was raining, so we know that StarLink works in the rain. It won't snow here, but I've seen people say it still works in the snow. And it turns out I didn't have the correct drill bit to widen the coax cable hole enough so that that big extra brick that's on the StarLink cable can get through the wall. So I asked around. I asked my dad, I asked my uncle, I asked a few friends, you guys have a certain size drill bit? And my dad seemed to have a drill bit that was wide enough, but the problem arose when I drove all the way to his place. I picked up the drill bit. He didn't need it in any immediate future, so I just told him I would bring it back when I was done with it. So I started trying to widen the hole so that we could fit the StarLink cable through it, and wouldn't you know it, our wall here is actually a little thicker than it seems. I thought they used some kind of basic drill bit when Comcast showed up here and drilled that hole in the wall. Turns out they used some kind of like extra extremely in-depth drill bit, because I was drilling all the way in on this side, all the way to the black part of this drill bit to where I couldn't drill in any further, and I was doing the same thing on the opposite side too. So I thought, oh man, I can't get all the way through, so let me try from the opposite end. It still wouldn't go all the way through, and obviously it's a pretty small hole, so it's very difficult to understand what you're looking at and how wide you need to get the drill bit inside. And I was very frustrated because I had already taken several trips and this was already taking more time than I thought. So we went to the hardware store and started asking around for drill bits that were longer but still wide enough, and most of the time they were all in these big packs and you had to buy like 6 drill bits or 3 drill bits that were way too big or way too small, and I wasn't sure if it was going to work out. But luckily we found this magnetic drill bit extension, which was kind of cool. It only cost about $3, and basically it allowed you to use a pre-existing drill bit on the top and then just put this back on your power drill, and that would allow you to drill in further, of course. But the reason, in case you're wondering why it has so much tape on it, is because when drilling through the wall, it was getting jammed a lot, and several times I would get my dad's drill bit stuck in the wall, and as I would try to pull back, it would pop right off because it's just a magnet. It's not very strong, so any type of give, the drill bit would come right off again. So I had to keep a pair of pliers around so I could pull the drill bit out when I needed to. But eventually, yeah, after troubleshooting it for a while, this was the key. It did actually end up working. We widened the coax hole big enough to the point that the big chunk on the end of the StarLink wire can actually fit through the hole, and then it just became a bit of a tedious task of tacking the coax cable to alongside the house. That way it doesn't look so tacky and ugly in a way. So yeah, essentially there were just a few points around the house that we anchored the coax cable to the point now where you can hardly even see it. You really only notice the wire if you're looking for it, and now it feels very clean. We plugged everything in and it's still working, and we finally figured this all out. I had to borrow a ladder as well because we didn't have our own ladder to get up on the roof and tack the coax cable down at all the points we wanted to. It looks very clean, very minimal now, and at this point I'm just going to be really annoyed if we decide to move later and take StarLink with us, because taking all of those tacks out and taking the wire out of everything is just going to be a huge mess I'm not looking forward to cleaning up. And at this point StarLink doesn't let you transfer service, though I'm sure they will in the future. So I guess if we moved, we would probably just keep StarLink here, which would suck because I would like to keep StarLink. I don't want to give it away to someone else, but we're not moving anytime soon, it sounds like. So figured I'd fill you guys in on what was taking up a lot of our time lately. We have other projects in the works. That's just one of them. Anywho, hopefully StarLink can shrink that little extra chunk on the end of their cable sometime, because I feel like that was the most problematic part of the whole experience, and my wife was very patient about it. She helped me through a lot of the experience. She's very good with a hammer, sometimes better than me at tacking stuff in in, which I'm like, dang, hon, you're powerful. But anywho, I'm glad that project is now done. We just got to clean up some sawdust and call it a day. But thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day. Bye-bye.